Hello, and welcome to another edition of ASCE Interchange Live. I'm your host, John Marston, Civil Engineering Source Associate Editor for the American Society of Civil Engineers. Thanks for joining me today for a discussion on how to fight food insecurity through sustainable agriculture. My guest today is Isaya Kisekka, Professor of Agro-hydrology and Agricultural Water Management at the University of California, Davis. He's also the director of the UC Davis Agricultural Water Center. Welcome, Isaya.
Thank you for having me, John.
We're glad you could be with us today. The world's population has officially passed 8 billion people and is expected to continue growing through 2030. While many find this exciting, it also spotlights the challenges humankind faces in our sustainable development for the future. Larger communities mean more food and resources are needed to sustain them. Engineers are being urged to create innovative solutions to fight food insecurity in communities around the globe. First, what is food insecurity, Isaya, and who is affected most by it?
Food insecurity refers to situations when people don't have access to nutritious foods. And the communities of people that are more vulnerable to food insecurity than others, for example, people that are living on limited incomes, that, for example, spend a big chunk of their income on, say, housing, which leaves them little resources to buy fresh produce. Or the elderly who may have expenses related to health care that leaves them little resources to buy food, fresh foods. Or minority communities that for some structural reasons find themselves with limited resources to afford affordable, nutritious foods. But it is important to note that we are all at risk of food insecurity. And this is a global problem, both in the developed world, like the United States, and in developing countries, many developing countries. Because if you think about it, the Ukrainian war, when it happened, there was food insecurity in East Africa just because our global food supplies are so interconnected now. Or if we have climate extremes in California, national food supply is impacted because in California we supply a third of the country's fresh fruits and vegetables and 2/3 of nuts and fruits. So at some point we are all vulnerable to food insecurity.
All your points are very well taken. How can sustainable agriculture help? What makes it different than conventional agriculture?
So in conventional agriculture, historically, the way agriculture has been practiced was that we were trying to maximize yield as a function of inputs. So economic returns were the primary driver. But what makes sustainable agriculture different? In sustainable agriculture, the concept is we try to meet our present needs without hindering future generations to meet the needs. That means we have to practice agriculture in a way that is environmentally friendly, it is economically viable, but it's also socially just. So maximizing yield and economic returns are no longer the only factors to consider. So we are shifting from an era where maximization was a goal to an era where we have to optimize multiple objectives.
That makes sense. Now, what's being done now to produce new food and crops sustainably while optimizing existing resources?
There are many initiatives and technologies that people are working on here in the US and around the world to increase adoption of sustainable agriculture and its potential. One that comes to mind is regenerative agriculture. In regenerative agriculture, the concept is you want to minimize use of external inputs. This could be fertilizers or pesticides or water. And you want to improve soil health such that you have more biodiversity in the soil. You improve the soil's ability to hold moisture such that the agriculture system is more resilient to climate extremes. So farmers practice things like cover cropping, crop rotation, and you see this in the Midwest, in the high plains, and here in California. Many farmers are starting to see the benefits of this. The other is technology, smart technologies or precision agriculture technologies that allow farmers to apply inputs like fertilizers or water at the right time, in the right place, in the right amount. So you need technologies like GPS, and increasingly AI is being used to develop analytics that allow farmers to predict response of the agriculture systems to inputs. And very interestingly, we are also starting to see a lot of indoor vertical farming or controlled environment agriculture in urban areas where you're growing food near to where it's going to be consumed, as well as the concept of circular agriculture. We talked about traditional agriculture, which was very linear. You use resources, produce food, and produce waste. You have waste byproducts. In a circular system, the idea is there's no waste. You're recycling and reusing, so your system is much more sustainable.
Makes a lot of sense. Now, what is a civil engineer's role in bringing these things to life?
Civil engineers have a big role to play in helping society achieve the potential and benefits of sustainable agriculture. And I can give you a few examples. One is water management. One of the biggest inputs to sustainable agriculture is water. And civil engineers can help us design infrastructure to convey water. In California, we joke that we live between feast and famine because we're either living in a multi-year drought or we have a historical drought. And recently, our governor passed an initiative on the water plan, and one of the big ideas there is to increase above and below ground storage. And civil engineers would be key to designing and modernizing our infrastructure, working with others like agriculture engineers. The other is in developing infrastructure for vertical farming and controlled environments, where we're now growing foods in stacks, in warehouses or greenhouses or other structures. How do you design those systems to be energy efficient and resource efficient? Or how do you help in recycling to achieve the benefits of circular agriculture systems? Building infrastructure for communications. One of the biggest limitations to really achieving some of the benefits of sustainable agriculture is if you go to the rural areas, you don't have internet. Sometimes I go in the Central Valley and I lose internet connectivity, and in environments like that, you can't implement the sensors that are reliant on the cloud. Or there's also the idea of agrivoltaic, where you put solar panels above crops and you're trying to generate renewable energy and food from the same piece of land. And I think civil engineers would be a very critical part of the system to develop that infrastructure, okay? As well as things like conducting environmental impact assessments and so on.
Mm-hmm. Now, as civil engineers help out in these sorts of things, what kind of challenges do you anticipate them having in applying these things?
It's a good question, John. I think when you're implementing a sustainable agriculture project, these typically require multidisciplinary contributions. So you're working with agronomists, you're working with policy people, you're working with lenders, you're working with people from different backgrounds. So engineers have to be savvy in how they they work with these different stakeholders, and I'm sure multidisciplinary working in multidisciplinary teams is not a foreign concept to civil engineers, but that would be very important in sustainable agricultural projects. The other is, how do you maneuver policy environments that are sometimes not aligned with sustainable agricultural goals? I'll give you an example. In the West, everybody knows that water is a big issue. And in the Colorado Basin, for example, some of the water rights, if you don't use your water right, people say use it or leave it, or use it or lose it. Okay? If you don't use your water, you stand the risk of losing some of your right to that water. Yet that is not really a goal of sustainable agriculture, because in sustainable agriculture, we are trying to optimize use of resources. The other is, maneuvering the economic viability. Agriculture is a risk environment. How do you design projects that your clientele, who will be farmers in this case, have the confidence that they will have a return on investment in such types of projects? Also, being sensitive to the cultures of the people you're working with, I think is important as well.
Yeah, speaking of cultures and that sort of things, how can this sustainable agricultural approach accommodate different types of communities, such as urban city centers or large industrial zones?
I think the key is to design solutions that meet the specific needs, because you're going to have different needs for large-scale agriculture, say in a rural area, to urban agriculture near a big city like Los Angeles or San Francisco, for example. In a large farming environment, the need may be to implement precision agricultural technologies to minimize inputs. Okay? So you will have to design a system that can work at large scales. Okay? And people are doing this. They're developing autonomous robots or sophisticated GPS systems to help optimize inputs. Or the goal may be to implement practices to improve soil health to make systems more resilient. But on the other hand, in an urban environment, the goal may be to optimize space. You have limited space and you want to build a vertical farm, for example. How do you build a vertical farm in the middle of the city to produce fresh foods using limited resources, maybe on utility water supplies and limited energy? Or how can the civil engineers work with city planners to implement sustainable agriculture in design projects, for example, green roofs or green gardens where people could grow fresh foods? Or if you're designing parks, how do you integrate community garden spaces or things like that?
Yeah, that makes sense. That kind of leads into my next question about how can these concepts be integrated into existing infrastructure systems? I think you already started touching on that.
Yeah, because the idea of sustainable agriculture is not new. It has been around for a long time, but we haven't really integrated it in a lot of our planning. So I think to integrate this would require working with stakeholders, both in the public and the private sector. And so when government is implementing projects, how can make them conscious of the benefits of sustainable agriculture? Or if banks are lending money, they prioritize sustainable agriculture concepts. Or if as a consumer, you say, you want food that is produced in a sustainable way, and that would help drive the adoption of sustainable agriculture and integrate it in all the farming initiatives that are going on.
Okay. How do these solutions address the United Nations goals for sustainable development?
Think of all the initiatives that I'm familiar with. I think sustainable agriculture is one of those that aligns the most with most of the UN Sustainable Development Goals. Because if you think about it, John, one of the main ones is one of the main SDGs is no hunger.
Mm-hmm.
We want to live in a world where no child or adult goes without food. And since sustainable agriculture, the goal is to produce foods in an environmentally sustainable way, we are contributing to food security. The other SDGs are ending poverty. Because if you practice sustainable agriculture, such a system is going to be more climate resilient. Say, for example, agrivoltaic, where you're generating electricity from the same piece of land as where you're growing crops. So you have multiple income streams. You're getting money from crops, you're getting money from renewable energy. So you can contribute to reducing hunger. The other sustainable goals that are indirectly connected to sustainable agriculture is, for example, the good health SDG or the clean water and sanitation. Because if we practice agriculture in a sustainable way, for example, we will not have a lot of non-point source pollution coming from agriculture and going to pollute groundwater sources or things like that. Or the SDG related to renewable energy, cheap and renewable energy. I think sustainable agriculture aligns very, very well with most of the UN Sustainable Development Goals.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you. Isaiah, I appreciate your being with us today, and thank you for joining us for this enlightening discussion on food insecurity and how it can be fought through sustainable agriculture. And good luck with you in your continued work on that.
Thank you for having me, John.
Sure. For more information on ASCE's Interchange series, visit asce.org/interchange. Thanks for tuning in today, and we'll see you next time on ASCE's Interchange Live.